Hey guys, so my sister and I previously did a vlog on the Loki series, and definitely feel free to check that out if you want to get our initial thoughts on the show. But after having time to rewatch and think about the show a little more, I wanted to go more in depth on the series and how it handles the character of Loki, especially in relation to his previous appearances in the MCU. I genuinely love Loki, and I would even go as far as to say that he's one of the best characters in the MCU. In all of his previous appearances, both the writing and Tom Hiddleston's portrayal of him worked beautifully together to create a villain that was not only menacing, but also charming and surprisingly relatable. You could tell that the creative teams that worked to bring this character to life put a lot of thought into the complexity and vulnerability of this character, and it's definitely connected with fans around the globe, making Loki even more popular than many of the heroes. So, when a Disney Plus series about Loki was announced, needless to say, I was really excited. Not just because it meant that Loki would be returning after his apparent death in Infinity War, but because we'd finally be getting a series focusing on this character's story rather than him being a side character. But after watching all 6 episodes, I gotta say, it's really not good. And at least in terms of reviewers, I'm actually a minority in this opinion. Nearly all of the reviews that I've seen, both professional and from YouTubers, genuinely praise the show, which is surprising to me since I honestly think that the problems in the show are pretty glaring. If I had to guess, I'd say that similar to Endgame, a lot of people were still riding the hype from the fact that we were even getting a Loki series at all, so much they're ready to like anything that was shown on screen. And I think that after that hype dies down, more people will start to recognize the show's issues. I could be wrong, but that's just my prediction. Until then, though, I wanted to talk in depth about why this show really did not work for me. So, without further ado, here are 11 reasons why the Loki series sucks. 1. The Loki series is not about Loki. Obviously, since Loki's name is literally the title of the show, I, like a lot of other fans, was expecting the series to be something of a Loki character analysis. We've seen Loki open up and be vulnerable in previous movies, but with him as our protagonist, this is our chance to really get to know him on a more personal level. What was going through his head when he attacked Jotunheim and Earth? What are his real feelings towards his family? When is he being genuine, and when is he putting on a facade to protect himself? But after the first few episodes, it's pretty clear that that's not what this show is. At all. This is a show about the TVA, if anything. Instead of getting to know Loki, we get long, drawn-out exposition about the multiverse and timelines. It genuinely feels like they're just using this series as an excuse to set up future movies like Quantumania and Multiverse of Madness, and they were like, hey, well, the fans want to see more Loki, so let's just toss him in there somewhere as well. I don't feel like I learned anything about Loki or got to know him better as a character. As far as his backstory goes, the only new information we get is, that he was DB Cooper because he lost a bet to Thor? Okay. What does this add? Nothing. You could cut this entire sequence out and it wouldn't change a thing. I mean, the only reason they put it in there is because, they thought the shot of Loki jumping out of an airplane would look cool in the trailer? I mean, I guess you could also technically make the argument that we get a little more of Loki's history in episode 3 when he tells Sylvie about his mother, but this doesn't really tell us anything new either. We already know that he was close with Frigga and that she taught him magic. We've seen that before in other Thor movies. That's honestly pretty pointless too, which is such a waste of potential. The series takes place right after Avengers 1. We could have learned more about what happened to Loki in between Thor 1 and the first Avengers. It was heavily implied that Loki was tortured and mind-controlled by Thanos and the Black Order. We could have found out how Loki met Thanos and what the ordeal was like for him. But instead, all the focus is given to this new character, Sylvie. Yeah, Loki barely does anything once she's introduced. He's completely shoved out of the way to give her the spotlight. She's the one who gets to be the badass in the show. She's the one who actually moves the plot along. Loki, on the other hand, is just kind of there for the ride. Yeah, things happen to him, but his actions rarely, if ever, have any impact on the actual plot. There was even a point in one of the episodes where the writers wanted to go even more in depth on Sylvie's backstory, but Marvel said no, since it would deviate from Loki being the focus, although they pretty much did that anyway. I mean, when your writers literally have to be reminded what the focus of their show is supposed to be, that's not a good sign. I honestly don't get why they didn't just make this whole show about Sylvie, since she's obviously the one they want us to be hyping around. Although, to be honest, it might actually be a good thing the writers didn't try to focus more on Loki because of my next point. Loki is poorly written and stupidly out of character. Part of what made Loki such a great villain in the first Avengers was how calculating he was. He was smart, he was cunning. You always got the sense that he was a step ahead of everybody else. His intellect was always a strength that made him intimidating. This Loki is a blithering idiot. He fights like a clumsy moron, even though we've seen plenty of times before that he's capable in combat. I mean, really? He fights with a fucking vacuum cleaner? He barely does anything to move the plot forward, and even gets drunk and makes a scene when he's supposed to be undercover, something I'm positive the Loki from previous films would never be stupid enough to do. I mean, don't get me wrong, normally I'd be down for seeing Loki being more lighthearted and have a good time, but in this context, it just makes him look like a complete dumbass. Imagine if instead this song sequence was a quiet moment just between Loki and Sylvie. Like, maybe the song he sings was a lullaby Frigga used to sing to him, and the scene is his way of trying to share with Sylvie what having a mother was like. Wouldn't that make more sense? Wouldn't that be more poignant? But no, we just need an excuse for Loki to act like a moron so we can laugh at him. I've heard some people trying to explain his sudden shift in character by saying that the events of the series change him into someone else, but let's just call it what it really is. Lazy writing. I mean, are they seriously trying to suggest that just having watched a few clips of his future and meeting a woman version of himself in a matter of a few days would have shifted him into someone else entirely? It doesn't matter what spin you try to pull on it. At the end of the day, this?
I won't touch Barton, not until I make him kill you. Slowly, intimately. In every way he knows you fear.
Is not the same thing as this.
Taking this one to Sharu.
Okay. And the tickets?
Orders come from the top to get her on this train.
I mean, good God, it's almost like the lead writer didn't even watch Loki's other movies. Oh wait, he didn't. Yeah, I'm not kidding. Michael Waldron, the lead writer, literally didn't even watch Thor 1 or Avengers 1 before writing the script for the series. So I guess I can't be that surprised that Loki doesn't act like Loki after all, can I? Sure, Waldron might have listened to Tom Hiddleston's Loki lectures where he discussed the character's past, but at the end of the day, hearing someone talk about a character is not a substitute for actually watching that character. It really only goes to show that the creative team was more interested in their new characters, mainly Sylvie in the TVA, rather than Loki, even though, you know, he's literally who the show's named after. In fact, it honestly feels like the only reason Loki does act so incompetent is to make Sylvie look better by comparison so she gets to be the superior Loki. I know that a lot of Loki fans had similar issues with Ragnarok, since Loki is basically kind of a punching bag in that movie. I actually really liked Ragnarok. I thought it was really entertaining, and I enjoyed seeing a lighter side to Loki, but I do get the criticism, especially since Loki isn't anywhere near as intimidating in that movie as he is in his previous appearances. Even still, I'd like to point out there are also plenty of times where we're supposed to laugh at Thor as well, and they at least gave Loki the dignity of being a hero and reconciling with his brother in the end. This series, which, again, is supposed to be about Loki, doesn't even do that. And yet the ironic thing is, even though they clearly put more effort into Sylvie's character, it really didn't even pay off in the end. 3. Sylvie is a terribly written character. Sylvie has virtually no personality in this show outside of being a hashtag girl boss. Like I said before, her only real purpose in the series seems to be just being a badass to shit on Loki's character and make him look pathetic. Even though we get more insight into her backstory than we ever get into Loki's, I still don't feel invested enough to care about her. Her only emotion seems to be anger all the time. All she wants is to destroy the TVA, and that's it. If there's one word I should never use to describe Loki, and likewise any other version of him, it's boring. Where's Loki's charm? Where's his charisma, his wit? I don't see any of that in Sylvie. She's just another one of Disney's flat, soulless Mary Sue that they don't want to give any flaws to, because apparently being a role model is more important than being, you know, an actually interesting character. I find it so funny that Disney is constantly putting out films with all these female leads in an effort to be less sexist, when ironically they're playing into sexist tropes by thinking that just being female will automatically make a character interesting. Because, you know, it won't. You still have to put effort into giving them a personality, guys. Michael Waldron also seemed to confirm this by saying that Sylvie would make an interesting Loki variant because she brings a feminine energy to the character. Because I guess he doesn't realize that girl is not a personality trait. Not to mention the fact that the only other role she plays is being Loki's out-of-nowhere love interest, and yeah, let's get into that next. Loki and Sylvie is a garbage pairing. Part of the reason my opinion of this show dropped considerably by episode 3, aside from the poor dialogue and clunky fight choreography, was the hinting that Loki and Sylvie were going to be a romantic item. I kept praying that the show wasn't actually going to go through with it, and when they did by episode 6, I was pissed. Normally I wouldn't let a ship I dislike get in the way of my opinion of a show this much, but they pretty much make this romance a central part of the show, so I kind of don't have a choice. First of all, Loki and Sylvie are literally the same person. They have the same last name, same family, and supposedly the same personality. Making them fall in love is honestly the dumbest idea I've ever heard. I'm not making the assumption that Loki and Sylvie are the same. The show explicitly states that multiple times.
The variant we're hunting is you.
You do! Because we're the same!
But you really are one of you.
In fact, I'm pretty sure the only reason they didn't have Sylvie talk more about what life was like was her Thor and her Odin was because it would have made more people realize how gross and messed up this pairing really is. If they were seriously going to go through with this idea, they could have at least gone all the way with it instead of being cowards and tried to make it seem less weird by having Sylvie change her name and her appearance. It doesn't matter how you try to cover it up, at the end of the day, Sylvie is still a Loki variant. I mean, I could maybe stomach this idea a little more if they were at least trying to pass it off as a joke. I mean, the absurdity of actually literally falling in love with yourself does have some decent comedic potential. But no, they genuinely want you to take this romance seriously, and I can't because it's just so fucking stupid. I also hate that it plays into so many tired, cliche, heteronormative romance tropes because it feels like it has no purpose outside of man and woman cannot exist together without hooking up. Because let's be honest, the only reason they paired Loki and Sylvie together was because Sylvie is a woman. Do you think they ever would have tried to pair Loki with President Loki or Boastful Loki? They're all Loki variants with the same personality and everything too, right? But nope, it's only the female variant that Loki falls for, of course. I also really hate this idea they're pushing that Loki is so narcissistic that the only person he could ever fall in love with is literally himself. They're basically using this as a way to mock Loki's character by saying, haha, Loki fell in love with himself because he's such a narcissist.
What a incredible seismic narcissist! You fell for yourself!
Except he's not. I mean, sure, it's easy to get that impression because Loki acts very arrogant and grandiose at times, but at the end of the day, it's just that, an act. We know Loki doesn't actually think very highly of himself. We've seen him struggle with self-loathing after learning about his heritage as a frost giant. We also know that Loki has a lot of empathy and compassion for others and has acted very selflessly to save the people he cares about. So how can we sit here and call Loki a narcissist when he's clearly shown that's not who he actually is? The ironic thing about this too is that the narrative that Kate Herron and Michael Waldron are trying to sell about this pairing makes absolutely no sense. On the one hand, they're trying to claim that it makes perfect sense for someone as arrogant as Loki to fall in love with himself, and yet on the other, they're also trying to claim that Loki falling in love with Sylvie is a way for him to learn self-love and acceptance. But if you already think that Loki's a narcissist in the first place, then why would he need to learn self-love? Not to mention, Kate Herron then turns around and says the pairing isn't self-cessed because Loki and Sylvie aren't really the same person, which A, yes they are, the show has already established that on numerous occasions, and B, if that were the case, then how is this relationship about self-love? Every interview I've read from Herron and Waldron about this pairing just reeks of desperation. Like they've realized this pairing clearly makes a lot of people really uncomfortable, and now they're just trying to scramble up whatever bullshit excuse they can, even if it's completely nonsensical and contradictory to what they've said previously. If you want to have Loki learning self-love by forming a bond with another version of himself, fine. But why the fuck would you make that a romantic pairing? It's just stupid and pretty creepy and gross to boot. Although, to be fair, I do want to make clear that the whole self-cess isn't the only thing about this pairing that's bad. Even if that whole aspect of the relationship doesn't make you uncomfortable, it also has another huge problem, namely that Loki and Sylvie have absolutely no chemistry whatsoever. Their relationship is completely one-sided. Anytime Loki tries to convey his feelings for her, Sylvie doesn't look like she's in love. If anything, she just looks uncomfortable. Look at this scene where the two of them are reunited. Loki runs up to her, clearly thrilled to see her, and she just stands there. There's literally a scene where Loki gets pruned right in front of her, and Sylvie has literally no reaction at all. Where in this series am I supposed to believe that Sylvie ever reciprocates Loki's feelings for her? I'm serious, point to me that moment. Why should I be invested in a relationship that's just Loki pining over someone who clearly doesn't give a shit about him? And I don't know if this is the fault of the actress, the director, the writing. If I had to guess, I'd say probably a combination of all three, since the way Sylvie treats Loki seems very deliberate. Literally, all she does in this show is just treat Loki like shit.
Give me the £10.
You arsehole. You're a clown. Okay, shut up.
Nothing Loki does or says matters to her because they're constantly shoving in our faces that what Sylvie went through was so much worse than anything Loki's been through. And yet they're trying to pass off this relationship as cute because apparently Loki is nothing but a pompous narcissist and needs to be put in his place. How is this show doing Loki any justice as a character when all anyone does is shit on him all the time? It also really doesn't help that this whole relationship is pretty forced and rushed and makes absolutely no sense for Loki as a character. We literally spend one 42-minute long episode getting to know Sylvie before Loki just randomly decides out of nowhere that he's in love with her. For a 4-hour long 6-episode show, that's not nearly enough time to develop a well-established relationship. Also, this is still 2012 Loki, who's just escaped Thanos in the Black Order, meaning that he should be on his guard constantly and be wary of the idea of even being allies with anyone. Why would he ever allow himself to become that vulnerable around someone after spending only a day with them? It's just idiotic. 5. The framing of this show does not match the writing. What do I mean by this? Well, I think the best example of this is the character of Mobius. He's pitched to us as something like Loki's therapist/friend. He wants to learn about what makes Loki tick and get to know his more vulnerable side, befriending him along the way. Now, don't get me wrong, I like the idea of Mobius, or rather what Mobius is supposed to be. Loki having a genuine friend is a new and interesting idea, and it would be nice to see someone actually treating him with compassion for once. The problem is that the script does not support this at all because Mobius does some pretty objectively terrible things to Loki and never even does so much as apologize for or even acknowledge that what he did was wrong. We constantly see Mobius subjecting Loki to physical torture, insulting him and putting him down, and even blaming him for his mother's death, something we know was not actually his fault and that Loki already felt guilty for in the first place. I would be fine with Mobius doing this stuff if it was meant to show how callous and indifferent the TVA is, but the fact that we're supposed to agree with it and see this as a good thing for Loki is honestly pretty gross. I do want to clarify that I don't blame Owen Wilson for this. In fact, his performance as Mobius was actually one of the few things I did like about this show. But even though he's doing his damnedest to be as charming and likable and even kind to Loki at times as he can, if a script is lacking, no amount of acting skill is gonna save it. And unfortunately, that's exactly what happened here. The only conclusion I can draw from this is that Michael Waldron simply doesn't know how to write a good friendship and clearly has no idea what the hell therapy actually is, since there's nothing even remotely therapeutic about anything that Mobius puts Loki through. At no point in this series does Mobius ever take responsibility for anything that he does to Loki or any of the other variants that the TVA kidnapped and killed. I've heard people trying to defend him by saying that he was just doing his job, but, so were the Nazis, and that excuse didn't really hold up there. And yeah, Loki has done some pretty terrible things too, but that still doesn't excuse torturing him, especially when, according to the TVA, all of that was supposed to happen anyway. It doesn't matter how Mobius is pitched to us, you have to have good writing to support the idea that Mobius is actually a friend to Loki, and unfortunately, this script is sorely lacking in that regard. 6. Blatant false advertising. I've already talked plain about how Sylvie, not Loki, is the real protagonist of this show. In fact, I'm pretty sure the only reason they didn't just make this a show about her is because they knew marketing it as a show about Loki would get more viewers since he's already an extremely popular character. We were also lied to regarding the entire premise of the show in the first place. The Loki series was initially marketed as a show where we would see Loki time traveling and influencing different points in history. But when the show actually came out, Michael Waldron had this to say about the concept. People heard it's a show about Loki affecting historical events. I think everybody expects that Loki is going to be riding with Paul Revere. That's the lowest hanging fruit version of that. So we wanted to subvert those expectations. Yeah, no, because that would have been a fucking awesome show. I'm sorry, the idea that Loki would be causing chaos around different points in history wasn't a misconception on the fans' part. That's literally what we were told we would be getting. So excuse me if I'm pretty underwhelmed with what we actually got. I mean, I guess there's an attempt to have some of that in the show, but aside from the scene in Pompeii, we don't really get much of Loki doing any time traveling at all. In fact, half of the places he goes to are either completely fictional or in the future, so the audience doesn't have any kind of a connection with them anyway. By contrast, the show Good Omens did this a lot better. While some of the series does take place in fictional locations, a lot of the bonding between our two leads happens in real places in history. This is interesting because we recognize the places that they go to, so we want to see how the fictional characters interact with the real ones. I have no idea what the hell Lamentus 1 is, and I certainly don't know what Alabama is going to look like 30 years in the future, so why would I care what these characters do there? It doesn't mean anything to me. I would have loved to see how Loki interacted with, say, Shakespeare or the Boston Tea Party, but nope. Instead, we get him going to bland, uninteresting locations that look like every other sci-fi movie ever made. And that is just boring. 7. The quote-unquote queer representation is garbage. When the Loki series first came out, people were freaking out because there was a promo clip that showed Loki's TVA file where his sex is listed as fluid. Kate Howard and Michael Waldron then gave a bunch of interviews talking about how important it was for gender fluid representation to be in the show, as Loki is gender fluid both in Norse mythology and the comics. What they conveniently failed to mention, however, is that that piece of paper is literally the only reference to Loki's gender fluidity in the show at all. It's never seen, discussed, or even mentioned again. In fact, they seem to actively go against the idea of Loki being gender fluid with scenes like this.
Have any of you met a woman variant of us?
Sounds terrifying.
Huh? Shouldn't you all be female as well as male if you're all really gender fluid? And why would a female Loki be terrifying? Kate Herron later addresses by not addressing it, basically admitting that she had no explanation as to why the other Lokis would be surprised at the idea of a female Loki, and saying that it was up to interpretation. Which is really just a lazy way of saying that they never actually took Loki's gender fluidity into consideration at all. How can they have the nerve to claim that they worked really hard on having gender fluid representation when they turn around and pull this lazy shit? I mean, was the fact that there was an alternate universe version of Loki who was a woman the gender fluid aspect of the character you were referring to? Was that what you were going for? You do know that's not what gender fluidity is, right? Like, not even close. I'm sure this wasn't entirely the fault of the creative team. If I had to guess, Disney probably stepped in and restricted how queer they could actually make the character, cause, you know, we still need money from China and Russia. But that doesn't change the fact that they actively lied about the representation in the show because it sounded good for PR, and they wanted to bait LGBTQ viewers into watching the show, which is honestly pretty offensive. The same thing happened with the confirmation that Loki was bisexual. Like, wow, you put in one freaking line and now all of a sudden you want to be celebrated as this amazing step forward for representation. I'm sorry, you don't get brownie points for just saying that a character is queer and not actually doing the work to show that. This has been an unfortunate trend with a lot of Disney properties where they claim to want to have more LGBTQ characters in their movies and series, but only show this in brief shots and lines that can be easily edited out so they don't offend their homophobic viewers. You can claim to be progressive all you want, but if you really cared about representation, you wouldn't care what homophobic viewers think of your movies by trying to pull this half-ass playing both sides shit. Some viewers have also pointed out that the Loki and Sylvie pairing is also pretty homophobic and transphobic in its own way. Like, you have Marvel's first confirmed queer character, no, gay Joe Russo doesn't count, and you put him in this bizarre, incestuous relationship with his female self? What the hell were you thinking? There's also the issue of autogynephilia, which was a mental illness made up by a guy named Ray Blanchard in the late 80s, where he basically said that men who wanted to transition into women did so because they were sexually attracted to the idea of themselves as a woman. Naturally, a lot of trans women found this rather offensive, and it remains a very controversial topic to this day. Some trans and non-binary viewers have pointed out that Loki literally falling in love with a female version of himself was kind of alluding to this and took issue with it. Now, I want to be clear that I don't think that anyone on the creative team did this to deliberately offend anybody. If I had to guess, I'd say Michael Waldron probably doesn't even know what autogynephilia is. But all that tells me is what little thought or effort they actually put into portraying this topic. Even though we know Loki being gender fluid was never actually brought up in the show, they still told us that was what we were going to be getting, and likewise, they knew that trans and non-binary viewers would be watching the show expecting to see that. If they really understood what they were getting themselves into, they would have done their research accordingly and treated these delicate topics with the care and understanding that they need. And they just didn't. Even if it wasn't intentional, the careless way they handled the topics of gender identity still came off as offensive to a lot of LGBTQ viewers, only serving to alienate them further rather than giving them the validation and representation that they deserve. 8. The show is also pretty racist. Now, I know a lot of people are probably going to disagree with me on this point, and I'm sure it's entirely possible that I could be overreacting here, but I have seen some other viewers point this out as well, so I figured it was worth bringing up. After watching a few episodes of the show, you'll quickly notice that every single person of color in the show is portrayed in a negative light. I mean, let's run down the list here. Ravonna and Hunter B-15, brutal, violent characters who are basically the epitome of police brutality. Hunter C-20 dies off screen, is mostly a tool to move the plot forward, we don't learn anything interesting about her. Boast of Loki, shown as arrogant and selfish, and betrays the other Lokis. Casey, used as comic relief in a few scenes, completely disappears after episode 2. And then of course you have Kang, who is basically just a fascist monster who wants to control the multiverse. It's also worth pointing out that the beginning scene in Mongolia is pretty problematic too. I mean, the villagers are literally just used as props we're supposed to laugh at, like, look at these silly Mongolians, Loki's so out of place, he doesn't belong there. Also, why the hell is it that Loki can speak fluent Latin, but as soon as someone speaks Mongolian, he gets confused and has no idea what the hell they're saying? Again, I don't think anyone was intentionally trying to be offensive here, but did it really not occur to anyone that having every single person of color in this show either be an evil monster or relevant comic relief might be an issue? I mean, did no one see how that might be seen as even a little problematic? I don't know, maybe I'm overthinking this one, but it still just rubbed me the wrong way. 9. The show has no consistent antagonist. If the goal of the show was to have Loki undergo some kind of a redemption arc by having him become a hero, then he needs a solid, well-established antagonist to go against for this to work, and the show just doesn't have that. We're first introduced to the TVA, which is shown to maintain order in the universe by systematically arresting and eliminating people for crimes that they didn't even know they were committing. Now, that's an interesting idea, Loki, a force of chaos, going against a force of order. Except no, we find out that actually they need Loki's help fighting another Loki variant. Okay, well, that's still a cool idea. Loki fighting an even more evil Loki could make for some interesting self-reflection and character development. But actually no, it turns out that Sylvie is the victim, so now we're back to the TVA being the villains. But actually no, it turns out that the TVA agents are all victims too, so now we need to fight the Timekeepers. Except no, it turns out that the Timekeepers aren't real, so now we need to fight Kang, who we're not even introduced to until the last episode. What are they trying to do with this? The writers are so preoccupied with having all these cheap plot twists for the sake of shock value that they forgot to have a coherent story. I don't care about being surprised, I just want to see Loki progress as a character in a story that makes sense. This script is just all over the place. 10. The finale straight up sucks. In both WandaVision and Falcon and the Winter Soldier, the series finales were some of the longer episodes in the show and showed the lead's character progression by having them become more powerful and overcoming their personal struggles. In this case, even though the finale is actually one of the shorter episodes, it still lacks substance, has a ton of scenes where the writers were trying to pad for time with unnecessary dialogue, even down to having characters repeat certain lines multiple times.
You kill me and destroy all this, and you don't just have one devil, you have an infinite amount. Or you two run the thing.
You kill me and the sacred timeline is completely exposed, multiversal war,
or you take over and return to the TVA as its benevolent rulers. You either take over and my life's work continues, or you plunge your blade in my chest and an infinite amount of me start another multiversal war, and I just end up right back here anyways.
Literally 90% of this episode is just Kang spewing out boring exposition about the origins of the TVA and the multiverse. Nothing really even happens until the end, and even then it doesn't really have any weight to it given how uninvested I was in everything else that was going on this entire show. Having Kang as the villain of the series isn't inherently a bad idea, but waiting until the very last episode to introduce him is just way too late in the game. And also, you know how in both of Marvel's previous series they had the leads gain new powers with new epic costumes and all that? Yeah, Loki doesn't get any of that. Loki doesn't get shit. Instead, he stays in his bland, ugly TVA outfit and once again takes a backseat to Sylvie, who is the one who opens up the multiverse. I know that some people are trying to excuse this by saying that we need to wait until season 2, but here's the thing. A TV show should not have to rely on future seasons as a crutch to make up for the faults of its first one. Take The Mandalorian, for example. Of course, people wanted to see more of the show, but if it had ended on the first season, it still would have delivered a fairly satisfactory story with a cohesive character arc. The ending of this season is just empty and boring, with nothing to be invested in at all. If I wasn't impressed with what I saw in the first season, why would I bother sticking around to watch the second one? 11. The worst guy of all time and the girl who came to kill him. Now, you're probably wondering what the hell that title is even supposed to be. Well, as it turns out, that is actually what the Loki series was initially called. Or rather, that's the script that the series was based off of. Michael Waldron actually wrote what he described as a time travel rom-com, which he later recycled into the Loki series script. This is pretty evident as the Loki series borrows a lot of major plot elements from Waldron's initial script, including the lead meeting an evil future president version of himself, him falling in love with a bland, strong female lead who just wants to kill the big man in charge, and the lead being an insufferable narcissistic douchebag, even though we already know that's not who Loki actually is. Now, for you to understand just how much of a problem this is, let me read you a few excerpts from this, Shakespearean masterpiece. I will just give you a heads up, the script does contain potentially toxic levels of cringe, so, you know, don't say I didn't warn you. Barrett is super hilarious. Coop, I got famous for inventing the dab. He dabs. All I care about is getting laid and getting paid. It's not like I'm running for president or anything. Anderson Cooper, not yet at least. Then, ever considered it? President Barrett Dukes? There's a twinkle in Barrett's eye as, for the very first time, he imagines being president. MOS, Taylor Swift's Fuck the Haters anthem Shake It Off begins as Barrett concludes the interview, standing to reveal, i.e. Yacht Day. He's on the bridge of a ridiculous yacht named the Titanic, somewhere in the stunning South Pacific. Barrett pops a molly, then goes live on Instagram and shotguns a beer. Camera follows as he steps outside and looks down at the deck where topless models and sycophantic bros are partying in the pool. They see him and dab in unison. He stares at his phone for a brief moment, contemplating, then hits send. He flips on the TV and snickers to himself. Barrett continued, I'm tight. But we hold for an extra quiet beat, feeling at last what's beneath Barrett's tight public facade. Loneliness. Dixie stands by the wrecked G-Wagon, aiming the particle pistol right at him. He has no choice but to oblige. Dixie staggers over and grabs the backpack. She reads the date he chose, June 9th, 1969. Dixie continued, Jesus Christ, 6/9/69, seriously? He holds up his hands, too weak to crack a joke in response. Dixie stares at him. Dixie continued, why did you save me? Barrett, I don't know. He takes out his cell phone and fires up Instagram Live. Barrett, sup fam, it's ya boy, just being tight per usual. Wanted to let y'all know I'm all good, some wild shit went down but nobody got hurt. I'm heading back to ATL now. Beat. That chick who shot at my house was crazy, wasn't she? I mean, like, total batshit psycho stalker. Beat. But she was kinda hot too, though. Crazy, but hot. Super hot. Longer beat, surprisingly honest and heartfelt. And kinda cool too. What the fucking fuck? This is what Michael Waldron based the Loki series off of? I've read fanfiction written by 12-year-olds that's better written than this shit. Who in God's name over at Marvel looked at this and thought, yeah, this guy has potential? Even overlooking how utterly amateurish and juvenile the script is, which, trust me, is not an easy thing to do. It clearly has nothing to do with Loki and should never have been associated with the character in any way. Barrett, or excuse me, not Loki, is nothing like the character that fans grew to love at all. It just shows how little they actually took from the comics in regards to both Loki and Sylvie. Even though Sylvie is supposed to be a combination of Lady Loki and Sylvie Lustion, a version of the Enchantress, no aspects of either of those characters are present in the character in the show. Everything about Sylvie was based entirely off of this dumbass Dixie character from Waldron's script. Just crossing out the names of characters from your old homework and replacing them with comic book characters that you claim to be such a big fan of is fucking lazy, and honestly pretty disrespectful to the source material, whether it's the comics themselves or even the previous films, which, again, Waldron didn't even watch. And really, doesn't that script just sum up everything that's wrong with this show? No one on the creative team actually gave enough of a shit to care about continuity or decent storytelling when it came to the character of Loki. Sure, Tom Hiddleston was listed as an executive producer, but I'm pretty sure that title was entirely decorative, since I don't see any of his creative influence in the show. Hell, he even said in an interview that almost none of the ideas he pitched for the show were even used. Which is such a shame. Tom Hiddleston is a phenomenal actor. You can tell from his interviews that he puts his all into every character he plays and genuinely loves analyzing and discussing Loki. That's why it's so frustrating to see his talents being completely wasted on a series written and directed by people who are clearly not doing anywhere near the same level of work that he is to portray Loki in an authentic and interesting way. I was so excited for this series ever since it was announced, and I wanted so badly to like it, but the many problems with it are just too much to overlook. The old characters are unrecognizable, the new characters are boring as hell, the story makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. It's just a colossal mess. If anything, it's really just a testament to the fact that Disney can pretty much just pump out whatever garbage they want at this point and people will still eat it up. If you like this show, great, but as for me, I'm so burnt out from how bad this show is that I don't think I'm even gonna bother watching season 2. I know that Kate Herron won't be returning, and I'm not sure if Michael Waldron will write the next season, but honestly, even if they do get an entirely different creative team, I really don't think there's anything that they can do to salvage the show at this point. I don't know what Loki's future in the MCU holds, but all I can say is that if he does show up in other projects after the show, let's just hope that they're better than this.